So Ed, how did you meet Leonard?
Um, One of the joys of my life is that I inherited Leonard. I inherited my relationship with Leonard. I inherited so many graces as a result of becoming the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena, following the brilliant George Regas. And George and Leonard were best friends. And George loomed very large and broke all convention, and he should have broken convention and stayed right there in the pew with this young new rector in 1995 or six, I think it was. And so I was daunted about George's presence, and I wanted to meet this rabbi in residence and ask him to continue to be the rabbi in residence of All Saints Church, Pasadena. So I called Leonard and said, let's meet. This was within the first month of my moving to Pasadena. And he said, well, George and I always met at this tennis club, which is halfway between Pasadena and Bel Air. And let's have lunch there. So that's where we had lunch. And I had two questions. One, will you be my rabbi in residence? Will you continue? And he said, well, I don't want to impose myself. And if you want me to do it, yes, yes. Frankly, the deeper question was, what am I going to do, Leonard? I am so anxious about this job. And how in the world does somebody follow George Regas? And he gave me the biblical reference and told me the story and said, the answer is, and he said it in Hebrew, and then he said, be strong, be of good courage, have no fear. And with that, I was introduced to what I call the Bierman process. There's no answer out there to pluck from the tree. You have to be the sap in the tree and bear the fruit in your own life. And I think that's what Leonard was for me. I think that's what he was for everybody. I'll never forget. Well, I should say, I never missed a Yom Kippur sermon during the 21 years I was there. And I always got to sit with Joan or the family. And Leonard and Joan would have my wife Hope and me over for a Seder or for some other occasion. And the kids would be there, and they're adults. And after a while, they began to call me Rebbe Eddie. And I felt such a part. I felt like I was a Bierman. And, sometimes Leonard would say, Ed, I think of you as Ed Beacon, not Ed Bacon. He's, that wouldn't be quite kosher. And yeah, it's such a great sense of humor. All of that is to say, I felt that he was leading me in a path that I would never, ever have entered. Um, After a Yom Kippur sermon, several of us were outside saying goodbye to one another. And somebody said, Leonard just lives and thinks at a different level than most of us. And that's just to bring it back to my metaphor about Leonard not offering an apple to pluck from the tree, but offering the actual sap of the apple tree, because that's what was flowing in his soul. And that's what he just thought everybody could live there. And to some degree, by being around Leonard, we were able to. Um,
So tell Tell me, what qualities do you think of today when you think of Leonard? You mentioned his brilliance, his passion, his compassion, his humanity, his challenging nature. What do you think of as sort of the qualities that have etched such a powerful image in your imagination?
Well, I'm actually, three things have just bubbled into my brain as a result of that question. Um, Clearly, he lived with a searing passion for truth telling and justice making. I will never forget being in a small banquet room of a beautiful hotel on the beach in Santa Monica during the um, Iraq War, Second Iraq War. And a group of us were there because of some organization or the other that we were members of. And there was an undersecretary of state there to talk about that. And Leonard stood, and his question was, what is the exit strategy? And the man didn't have one. And Leonard caught on fire. I had never been around someone that prophetic, but his righteous indignation combusted, and he lectured that man with the inhumanity and immorality of ever going into war without having an exit strategy. I thought, oh my God. I mean, I'm feeling it in my heart right now. Oh my God, I've never been around such an incendiary prophetic witness. So there was that passion, understood in the best sense of that word, and unfiltered candor when it was time, when it was appropriate. Then there was also the second thing of, it was really, really clear to me that he did not despise that undersecretary of state as a human being, that he loved that guy. And talking about thinking of Leonard every day, I do think of him every day. And one of the ways I think about him is I'll tell a friend or a colleague what Leonard told me. I had sent Leonard a sermon, and he critiqued it as the very best university professor would, and talked about how he agreed with my position, but the way I had arrived at the position really had no coherence. And then he said, but remember, Ed, you don't have to be flawless to be perfect. I love you, Leonard. And I repeat that to myself every time I make a mistake, every time I see a colleague or a friend or parishioner making a mistake. You don't have to be flawless to be perfect. So there was that humanity. So first is the prophetic passion. The second is the humanity. And then the third thing is he really knew, to use Christian language, that language is a sacrament. For him to find a poem and then make it his business to learn that poem so that he could recite that poem in the middle of a meal or in the middle of a sermon or in the middle of a telephone conversation, just stunning. So his love for poetry and language, and also he was such a romantic. I mean, such a romantic with Joan and with us, his friends, and with his children, with his grandchildren, and with musical theater. I just love how human he was. You know, he invited us to join him in the human race.
So you and I agree that we think of him often and really every day. And one of the things that I think about is what would Leonard say? What would he tell us to do? What would he think about this world of perplexity, of violence, of hatred, of vilification? He had the unparalleled capacity to see the depths of despair, and yet also to point us in a direction where we could see that ray of hope. So, what do you think he would tell us today? How would he help us make our way through this perplexing world?
The word cruelty comes to mind. He would be such a courageous critic of cruelty and how it shows up in the White House, in the other branches of government. I think that he would just give searing indictments of cruelty, from taking kids away from their nursing mothers and putting them in cages at the border, to his current critique of Israel Palestine, to the murder of people on the streets by police officers. He would know that our very humanity is at stake, nothing less than our humanity. And it has to do with how cruel we can be. And he was such a brilliant, elegant, I was going to say eloquent, but elegant, both and thinker, that he would call us to the garden. He would call us to live in the garden. And that's very emotional for me.
I guess this is an opportunity for you to reflect both on the blessings that Leonard brought onto all of us and sort of the community that you inhabited for 21 years.
Bottom line, he said, Ed, it's about taking heart, being of good courage, and not having fear. And when that is your daily agenda, you're still going to have to grapple. I loved his saying. I think it's E.B. White who said, every morning I get up and I'm drawn between how much to improve the world and how much to give thanks for the world, or love the world, or adore the world. That's what he would say. He would say, you know, if you are a human being enough to take heart, be of good courage, and do not fear, it will lead you into that kind of tension. And that's the best tension to have, to wake up in the morning and ask yourself, how much am I going to work to improve the world, and how much am I going to work to give thanks for the beauty of the world?